2 weeks after my daughter's engagement party, the event coordinator called me and said, "Sir, I recorded something terrible. Come alone and do not tell your daughter." What she played for me changed everything. My name is Gordon Reed. I am 67 years old, and for the last 4 years I let my daughter treat me like an open wallet because I was terrified of dying alone. But that afternoon, I realized my greatest threat was not loneliness. It was the 2 people I was paying to keep me company. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I sat at the heavy mahogany desk in my home office, staring at a piece of paper that felt heavier than a brick. It was a catering invoice for $14,000. The line items blurred together before my eyes. Beluga Caviar Stations imported champagne towers, custom silk napkins that would be used once and thrown away. It was the final bill for my daughter Amanda's engagement party, a party I had paid for entirely out of my own pocket. I let out a slow breath, the sound echoing in the empty, silent house. Ever since my wife Linda passed away 4 years ago, this house had become a mausoleum of memories, and Amanda knew exactly how to use that against me. She knew the silence terrified me. She knew that without her, I had no one left. So I paid. I subsidized her luxury downtown apartment. I funded her fiancé Justin's supposed consulting firm. I absorbed their patronizing sneers and their constant demands because I believed it was the price of keeping my only child in my life. My phone vibrated violently against the wood of the desk, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked at the screen expecting it to be Amanda with another demand. Instead, the caller ID showed a number I barely recognized. It was Valerie, the event coordinator who had managed the engagement party 2 weeks prior. I answered the call expecting a question about a lingering vendor fee. Instead, Valerie's voice came through the speaker, tight, rushed, and trembling with an anxiety that immediately made my stomach drop. She refused to speak over the phone. She told me she needed to see me immediately. She demanded we meet at a noisy, crowded coffee shop in the center of downtown, far away from my neighborhood. I did not argue. I did not ask questions. The sheer panic in a professional woman's voice was enough to tell me this was not about unpaid flowers. I agreed to meet her in 30 minutes. The moment I lowered the phone from my ear, the screen lit up again. It was a text message from Amanda. There was no greeting. There was no inquiry about how my day was going or how I was feeling. The message simply complained that the lease payment for her imported luxury car was due tomorrow, and she demanded I wire the funds by the end of the day. She added a complaint that Justin was stressed about his business and needed me to handle the car payment so he could focus. The financial bleeding was unceasing. It was a constant, relentless extraction of my resources justified by my daughter as her rightful inheritance paid out in advance. I put the phone in my pocket without replying, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. The coffee shop was a chaotic symphony of grinding espresso machines and overlapping conversations. I spotted Valerie sitting in the furthest corner booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup. She looked terrified. When I sat down across from her, she did not offer any polite pleasantries. She reached into her handbag and slid a sleek silver digital audio recorder across the scarred wooden table. Valerie explained that she had left the device running in the VIP coat room during the height of the engagement party. She had been using it to quickly dictate last-minute changes to the floral arrangements and forgot to turn it off when she rushed back to the ballroom floor. She told me she was reviewing her audio notes last night and caught a private conversation between Amanda and Justin. They had slipped into the coat room thinking it was empty. Valerie pushed the recorder closer to my hands. She said she could not sleep after hearing it. She said she did not want my money and did not want to be involved any further, but her conscience would not allow her to stay silent. Then she stood up and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with the small silver device. I did not listen to it there. I took the recorder, walked out into the cold afternoon air, and got into the isolated sanctuary of my car. I locked the doors. My hands were remarkably steady as I pressed the play button. I fully expected to hear evidence of Justin cheating on my daughter. I braced myself to hear him plotting with another woman. What played through the small speaker was infinitely worse. The audio was slightly muffled, masked by the distant thumping of the ballroom bass, but Justin's voice was unmistakable. He spoke with a chilling clinical precision. He said, "The minute the wedding is over and the irrevocable trust is signed, we initiate the competency hearing. I found a doctor who will sign off that his memory is gone. We liquidate the estate, put him in a state facility, and the cash saves my company." I stopped breathing. The air in the car suddenly felt too thick to inhale. I waited for my daughter to defend me. I waited for the child I had raised, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the woman whose wedding I was currently financing, to scream at him. I waited for her to slap him. Instead, the recorder captured the clear, unmistakable sound of Amanda laughing. Her voice echoed through the confines of my car, dripping with cruel amusement. She told Justin to just keep acting impressed by my boring logistics stories. She assured him I would sign the trust papers at the rehearsal dinner. She laughed again, a harsh, mocking sound, and said I was so terrified of being alone that I would do whatever she asked. I sat in the driver's seat as the recording clicked to an end. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The grief of losing my wife had been a heavy, suffocating blanket. But this grief was entirely different. This grief instantly crystallized into a cold, absolute, calculating fury. My daughter did not love me. My future son-in-law was actively plotting to erase my autonomy, steal my home, and lock me in a state-run psychiatric ward. I was not a father to them. I was a target. Before I could even process the magnitude of the betrayal, my phone buzzed violently in the cup holder. A high-priority notification flashed across the screen. It was an automated fraud alert from my primary banking institution. Someone had just attempted to initiate a $50,000 wire transfer from my personal savings account. The alert indicated that the transfer had failed due to a daily limit restriction and noted that the request was initiated from an unknown IP address. Justin was not waiting for the wedding. The financial execution had already begun. 10 seconds later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Justin's name. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing, lowering my heart rate. I wiped all emotion from my mind. I answered the call. Justin's voice boomed through the speaker, feigning a sickeningly cheerful tone. He asked how my afternoon was going, casually mentioning that they had run into a technical glitch online. He asked if I had experienced any trouble with the $50,000 wire transfer for their honeymoon fund, pretending it was a pre-approved gift we had discussed. I did not scream. I did not tell him I knew he was trying to steal my life savings. I embraced the silent reckoning. I played the role they had assigned me. I made my voice sound weak, slightly confused and apologetic. I stammered a little, acting like a technologically inept, lonely old man who was overwhelmed by the banking portal. I told Justin I was so sorry for the delay, assuring him that my computer was acting up and I would go down to the bank branch first thing tomorrow morning to fix the transfer in person. Justin's tone shifted to patronizing relief. He told me not to worry about it, calling me Dad and saying he appreciated me taking care of them. He told me to get some rest. When the call ended, I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and stared out the windshield. Amanda and Justin believed they were dealing with a soft, grieving retiree whose mind was slowly slipping away. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot who I was before Linda died. They forgot that I had spent 40 years of my life as a senior supply chain and logistics auditor for the state government. My entire career was built on hunting down corporate embezzlers, tracking hidden offshore accounts, and destroying arrogant men who believed they were smarter than the system. I did not need a team of investigators. I was the investigator. They had invited an apex predator of finance to their little robbery, completely unaware of the teeth hiding behind my polite smile. I reached for my phone again. I did not drive to the bank. I logged directly into the secured, encrypted portal I used for my highest-level accounts. I bypassed the standard menus and went straight to the joint emergency accounts I had set up for Amanda years ago. With 3 deliberate taps on the glass screen, I executed a complete administrative freeze on every shared asset. The money was locked. The credit lines were severed. The trap was set. The first countermeasure was deployed, and the real war had officially begun. I walked into my home office and shut the heavy oak door. The satisfying click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the first real comfort I had felt in hours. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I only flicked on the small brass desk lamp, casting a sharp, narrow beam across my dual monitors. I sat down in my leather chair, taking one long, deliberate breath. The grieving, terrified father, who had just listened to his own daughter plan his mental incarceration, was gone. He had to be. In his place sat the man who had spent 4 decades as a senior supply chain and logistics auditor for the state government. I had spent my entire professional life hunting down phantom inventory tracing, laundered funds through labyrinthine corporate structures, and destroying men who thought they were clever enough to hide their greed behind polished spreadsheets. Justin thought I was just a tired old widower who could barely navigate a banking app. He was about to find out exactly who he had invited into his life. I woke up my encrypted workstation and cracked my knuckles. It was time to perform a financial autopsy on my future son-in-law. I started with the most obvious target, his highly touted technology startup. For the past year, Justin had paraded this company around at every family dinner and social gathering, boasting about revolutionary algorithms and disruptive market synergy. He had shown me glossy pitch decks filled with buzzwords and projected revenue charts that pointed straight to the moon. It was based on those very charts that I had written him a personal check for $100,000 12 months ago. I had called it seed money. I had told myself I was investing in the man who was going to take care of my only daughter. I opened a private browser window and pulled up his company website. It was a masterpiece of corporate illusion, featuring stock photos of diverse smiling professionals staring intently at transparent screens, accompanied by paragraphs of meaningless tech jargon. But a website is just a painted mask. I needed to see the bone structure underneath. I bypassed the flashy landing page and logged directly into the state corporate registry database. I typed in the exact legal name of his limited liability company and hit search. The results populated almost instantly, and the facade began to crumble before my eyes. The company had no physical commercial address. Its registered agent was a generic mail forwarding service located in a strip mall 3 states away. There were no secondary corporate officers listed, no board of directors, and absolutely no public record of any payroll taxes being filed. It was a ghost ship. It was a hollow shell company constructed entirely out of digital smoke and mirrors. Justin was not a chief executive officer. He was a fraud. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I dug deeper. If the company did not exist, then I needed to know exactly where my $100,000 had gone. I logged into my secure banking portal and pulled the archived wire transfer receipt from a year ago. I isolated the destination routing and account numbers, using specialized tracking software. I still retained access to from my auditing days. I began to follow the digital breadcrumbs. The money had landed in his supposed corporate account on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the entire sum had been fractured into 20 different transactions. It had not been spent on software development, server hosting, or marketing campaigns. Instead, it had been funneled through a dizzying maze of secondary shell accounts, digital payment processors, and anonymous cryptocurrency wallets. Justin was trying to wash the money, trying to obscure the final destination. But digital money always leaves a trail if you know exactly where to look, and I knew every trick in the book. I spent the next 2 hours relentlessly tracing the fractured payments. I watched the funds cross state lines, bounce through unregulated exchanges, and finally pool together again in 3 specific offshore accounts located in the Caribbean and Central America. I cross-referenced those account identifiers with known databases of illicit financial networks. The results flashed on my screen, cold and undeniable. They were high-stakes, unregulated sports betting syndicates. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. Justin was not a brilliant tech entrepreneur waiting for his big break. He was a degenerate gambler drowning in the worst kind of debt. He had taken my seed money, the money I had given him in good faith to build a life with Amanda, and he had thrown it away on offshore sports books. I pulled up public records of civil judgments and began searching his name in surrounding counties. The hits rolled in one after another. Defaulted personal loans, aggressively maxed out credit cards, and outstanding judgments from predatory high-interest lenders. He was in the hole for over $250,000, and those were just the debts that had made it to the court system. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. The puzzle pieces snapped into place with terrifying clarity. This was never just about a greedy young couple wanting an early inheritance. This was about sheer, desperate survival for Justin. The unlicensed creditors he owed money to did not send polite collection letters. They sent men who broke legs and shattered kneecaps. Justin was backed into a corner, and his only way out was to liquidate my estate. To do that, he needed me out of the way. He needed me declared mentally incompetent so he could seize control of my assets and throw me into a state facility. He was literally willing to destroy my life to save his own skin, and my own daughter was laughing along with him, entirely complicit in my destruction. I realized in that moment that the danger I was in was not merely financial, it was physical. If their legal and medical maneuvers failed, Justin would become desperate, and a desperate man backed into a corner by violent creditors is capable of anything. I needed to secure my assets immediately, starting with the physical documents that proved my ownership of everything I had built. I pushed myself away from the desk and walked over to the center of the office. I moved the heavy leather armchair aside and rolled back the thick Persian rug, revealing the steel dial of the floor safe, embedded directly into the concrete foundation. I knelt on the floor, the cold metal biting into my knees. I spun the dial with practiced precision. 4 turns to the right, 3 to the left, 2 to the right, stop. The heavy internal tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying metallic thud. I pulled the heavy steel hatch open. A stale, familiar scent of old paper and confined air drifted up. This safe contained the blueprint of my entire life. My birth certificate, Linda's death certificate, emergency cash reserves, and the original unencumbered deed to the estate. I needed that deed to take to my lawyer, Stephen. We had to put the house into a blind, untouchable trust before Justin could try to leverage it again. I reached down into the dark cavity, my fingers brushing past thick manila envelopes and stacked bundles of emergency currency. I located the property folder and set it aside on the floor. But as I reached back in to organize the remaining contents, my hand brushed against something that made my breath catch in my throat. Tucked in the far back corner of the safe were 3 dark blue velvet boxes. They contained Linda's heirloom jewelry, her diamond engagement ring, a bespoke sapphire pendant we had purchased on our 20th anniversary, and a pair of flawless pearl earrings that had been in her family for generations. When Linda was dying, she had held my hand in her hospital bed and made me swear to protect those pieces. She had explicitly mandated in her final wishes that those specific items were to be given to Amanda only on the day of her wedding as a symbol of enduring family love and generational continuity. For 4 years, I had guarded those boxes like a sacred oath. I had opened the safe countless times just to trace my fingers over the velvet feeling, a fleeting connection to the woman I had loved more than life itself. I picked up the first velvet box. It felt strangely light in my hand. A cold dread began to pool in the pit of my stomach. I pressed the small brass clasp. The lid sprang open. The plush white satin interior was completely empty. The diamond ring was gone. My hands began to tremble. Not with fear, but with a seismic world-shattering rage. I snatched up the second box, snapping it open. Empty. I grabbed the third box, tearing the lid back. Empty. The sapphire pendant, the pearl earrings, the diamond ring. All of it was gone. I stared at the hollow velvet indentations, my mind racing to process the absolute violation I was witnessing. I was the only person who knew the combination to this safe. The only other person who even knew this safe existed. The only person who had ever watched me open it during a moment of foolish, trusting vulnerability was Amanda. She knew where the safe was. She knew I kept her mother's jewelry inside. She had watched my hands turn the dial. The betrayal was so profound, it physically hurt. It was a suffocating pressure expanding behind my ribs. Amanda had not just treated me like a bank account. She had stolen from her dead mother. She had crept into my office like a common thief, cracked the safe, and plundered the only sacred memories I had left of Linda. And I knew exactly why she had done it. She had pawned her mother's legacy to cover Justin's illicit gambling margins. She had traded her family's history to buy a few more weeks of time from violent creditors. I gently closed the empty velvet boxes. I did not throw them across the room. I did not scream. I placed them carefully back into the dark corner of the safe. Every lingering trace of paternal affection, every excuse I had ever made for my daughter's behavior evaporated in that instant. The girl who had stolen her mother's memory to fund a liar's gambling habit was no longer my child. She was merely an adversary who had breached my perimeter. I picked up the original deed to the estate, locked the floor safe, and slid the Persian rug back into place. The audit was complete. The time for gathering evidence was over. It was time to go on the offensive. The drive across the city was a blur of gray asphalt and flashing brake lights. I did not listen to the radio or roll down the window to feel the breeze. My mind was entirely consumed by a singular, mechanical focus. The grieving father who had wept over a hospital bed 4 years ago was gone, replaced completely by the forensic auditor who had spent 40 years dismantling corporate fraud syndicates. When you spend your entire adult life tracking stolen assets, you learn that every single high-value item leaves a digital fingerprint. Thieves always believe they are invisible, but greed makes them sloppy and leaves a trail. Before leaving my home office, I had accessed the digital insurance vault where I kept the detailed appraisals of my late wife's jewelry. I did not just have photographs of Linda's bespoke sapphire watch. I had the manufacturer's unique serial numbers, the micro-laser engravings on the clasp, and the registered insurance certificates. I immediately flagged those specific serial numbers through an international database used by certified jewelers and high-end collateral brokers. It took exactly 14 minutes for the database to register a direct hit. The system pinged a luxury estate buyer and collateral loan broker located in the affluent financial district across town. They had not just appraised the watch, they had processed it into their inventory. I parked my 10-year-old sedan between 2 pristine luxury SUVs in front of the brokerage. It was not a dingy neon-lit pawn shop on a street corner. It was a high-security fortress disguised as a boutique gallery. The windows were tinted and bulletproof, and the door required a magnetic buzzer to unlock. People did not come here to sell stolen televisions. They came here to liquidate generational wealth when their secrets became too expensive to hide. I pushed open the heavy glass door. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood behind the thick glass counter. He looked up from his tablet, his eyes immediately scanning my faded jacket and sensible shoes. He wore the practiced, condescending smile of a man who evaluated a person's net worth in fractions of a second and had clearly decided I did not belong in his establishment. "Welcome to Sterling Estate Brokers," he said, his voice dripping with polished indifference. "Are you looking for a specific appraisal today, sir? Or did you wander in looking for directions to the subway?" I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not waste a single second attempting to prove my worth to a man standing behind a cash register. I walked directly to the reinforced glass counter, reached into my inner jacket pocket, and pulled out a manila folder. I opened it with a sharp, deliberate flick of my wrist and slid a single sheet of paper across the polished surface. It was a formal, notarized affidavit of theft, paired with a blank police report template, pre-filled with the exact address of his brokerage. The man looked down at the paper. His condescending smile vanished instantly, replaced by a rigid defensive tension. "I am not here to browse your inventory," I said, my voice dangerously low and completely devoid of emotion. I am here for a bespoke sapphire and platinum watch, serial number 84729-04. According to the International Registry, you logged that exact item into your vault 3 days ago. That watch belongs to my late wife. It was stolen from a locked floor safe inside my private residence. You are currently in possession of stolen property valued well over $50,000. The broker swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the police report to my face. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to regain control of the room. Sir, we run a highly regulated business. Every transaction we process requires government-issued identification and sworn affidavits of ownership. We do not deal in stolen goods. If you are making accusations, I will have to ask you to leave before I call the authorities myself. I leaned closer to the glass, invading his space, projecting the absolute authority of a man who had interrogated chief executive officers and corrupt politicians for decades. Call them, I whispered coldly. Call the authorities right now. Tell them a retired state fraud investigator is standing in your lobby with proof that you processed a stolen family heirloom. We can lock down your entire operation, freeze your commercial assets, and have a forensic team audit your vault by sunset. Or you can open your computer, pull the intake slip for that transaction, and show me exactly who sat in that chair and sold you my dead wife's memory. The silence that followed was suffocating. The broker stared into my eyes, searching for a bluff, searching for a trace of hesitation. He found absolutely nothing. He realized in that agonizing moment that I was not a confused old man looking for a lost trinket. I was a tidal wave about to drown his entire business. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant facade collapsed. He turned away without saying another word, walking over to a secure filing cabinet behind the counter. He unlocked the heavy steel drawer and pulled out a thick ledger. He flipped through the pages, his hands shaking slightly, before extracting a carbon copy of a collateral loan agreement. He walked back to the counter and slid the paper toward me, keeping his hand pressed against the top edge. We followed standard procedure, the broker muttered defensively, his voice stripped of all its previous superiority. The client presented a valid state driver's license. They signed the affidavit swearing the items were a legal inheritance. We issued a cash loan against the collateral. We had no reason to suspect foul play. I looked down at the intake slip. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the boutique illuminated the ink on the page. I did not need to see the printed name at the top. My eyes locked directly onto the signature at the bottom of the contract. It was a signature I had seen thousands of times. I had seen it on messy kindergarten finger paintings. I had seen it on middle school report cards. I had seen it on university loan applications that I had paid off without a second thought. It was the distinct looping handwriting of my own daughter, Amanda. The physical reaction hit me like a jagged blade to the ribs. It is one thing to suspect a betrayal. It is an entirely different, earth-shattering reality to see the undeniable, documented proof written in your own child's hand. Amanda had not just stood by and laughed while her fiancé planned to lock me in a psychiatric ward. She had actively participated in my destruction. She had crept into my home, smiled in my face, and stolen the diamonds I had purchased to celebrate her mother's life. I stared at the staggering figure printed next to her signature. She had pawned the sapphire watch, along with the diamond rings, for a massive lump sum cash loan. My mind automatically connected the financial dots, the rapid math of an auditor assembling a timeline. The date of the transaction was exactly 1 day before Justin's offshore sports betting accounts were flagged for a massive margin call. Amanda had not stolen her mother's jewelry to buy a wedding dress. She had liquidated her own family history to bail out a degenerate gambler. She had sacrificed my legacy to cover Justin's illicit debts. The absolute finality of that realization severed the last remaining thread of my paternal blind spot. I was no longer looking at my daughter's signature. I was looking at the signature of an enemy combatant who had willingly chosen to declare war on my life. I need original copies of these intake slips, I demanded, pulling my phone from my pocket to photograph the documents before the broker could pull them away. I also need the security camera footage from your lobby on the day of this transaction. You will provide it to me immediately, or I will have a judge subpoena your entire surveillance system by tomorrow morning." The broker scrambled to comply, frantic to distance his business from the criminal liability I was building. He moved to the copy machine, his hands fumbling with the papers. As I stood there waiting, the cold silence of the luxury lobby was abruptly shattered by the sharp, persistent vibration of my cell phone. It was not a standard ringtone. It was the specific high-priority alert tone I had programmed for my primary financial institution. I pulled the device from my pocket. The caller ID displayed the direct line for the Fraud Prevention Department of the national lender holding the deed to my estate. I answered the call, keeping my eyes locked on the broker. "This is Gary," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Mr. Foster, this is the security division at your lending institution," a stern professional voice said through the receiver. "We are calling to verify a highly unusual transaction initiated on your account 20 minutes ago. We received an expedited electronic application for a reverse mortgage against the primary equity of your estate. The requested withdrawal amount is $150,000. I froze. The ambient noise of the pawnshop seemed to vanish, replaced by the rushing sound of blood in my ears. A reverse mortgage. It was the ultimate financial death blow. They were attempting to drain the entire equity of my home, legally binding the property to a massive debt that would result in immediate foreclosure the moment I was committed to a medical facility. I did not authorize any mortgage application. I replied, my tone dropping to a dangerous, absolute calm. "My property is fully paid off. How was this application legally submitted without my physical presence or my signature? That is exactly why our system flagged the request." Mr. Foster, the fraud specialist, continued. "The application was submitted through an online portal utilizing a digital power of attorney document. The document claims that you have surrendered complete financial control of your estate due to severe cognitive decline." The puzzle pieces locked together with sickening speed. The conversation I had heard on the audio recorder. The plan to push me into a facility. It was not just idle chatter. They were executing the timeline right now before the wedding even took place. They were desperate for cash, and they were accelerating their attack. "Who submitted the document?" I demanded, gripping the edge of the glass counter so hard my knuckles turned white. "What is the contact information listed on the primary application?" The specialist paused, clearly reading the file on his screen. "The primary beneficiary listed on the power of attorney and the contact number provided for the immediate disbursement of the $150,000 belongs to a Mr. Justin Davis." Justin. The parasite was trying to swallow the host alive. He had forged a legal document claiming my mind was gone, attempting to drain my home of its worth, while I was standing across town, retrieving the jewelry my daughter had stolen for him. They believed I was oblivious. They believed I was sitting at home grieving and confused, completely unaware that the walls were closing in around me. "Lock down the application," I commanded, my voice echoing off the marble floors of the pawnshop. "Flag the power of attorney as a fraudulent document. Do not decline the request yet. Suspend it in a pending status. Do not alert the applicant that the fraud department is involved. I am coming into the central branch tomorrow morning with my legal counsel to formally pursue federal charges for identity theft and wire fraud." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, just as the broker returned, sliding the copied intake slips across the counter. I snatched the papers, folding them precisely, and walked out the glass doors into the blinding daylight. The war had officially escalated far beyond a stolen watch. They were actively attempting to erase my legal existence. They wanted to steal my home and lock me in a cage, but they had made a fatal error. They had left a paper trail, and they had given me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy them. I walked to my car, the forged power of attorney burning in my mind. It was time to drive to my lawyer. It was time to build a cage of my own. I did not go home. Going home meant playing the role of the grieving father a moment longer than absolutely necessary. I drove straight from the pawn shop to the financial district. The tires of my sedan squealed slightly as I pulled into the underground parking garage of the high-rise building where my attorney worked. Stephen was not just a lawyer. He was a legal architect who specialized in building impenetrable walls around vulnerable assets. We had worked together for decades during my time as a state auditor. I provided the financial evidence of corporate fraud, and he prosecuted the offenders. He knew exactly how my mind worked, and I knew he never asked unnecessary questions. I bypassed his receptionist entirely, walking straight through the heavy glass doors and down the corridor to his corner office. Stephen looked up from his desk, his brow furrowing at the sight of my face. I did not offer a polite greeting. I walked to his desk and dropped the folded copies of the pawn shop intake slips and the printed notification of the fraudulent reverse mortgage application right over his open files. I told him my future son-in-law was attempting to leverage my estate with a forged power of attorney, and my daughter was fencing her dead mother's jewelry to cover his gambling debts. Stephen did not gasp. He did not offer useless apologies or sympathetic platitudes. He simply reached for the papers, his eyes scanning the ink with the cold efficiency of a predator. He saw the timeline. He saw the intent. He picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button, barking an order to his paralegal to completely clear his schedule for the rest of the afternoon. The doors were locked. The blinds were drawn. We went to war. Our first objective was stopping the immediate bleeding. The fraudulent reverse mortgage application was suspended in a pending status, but Justin only needed one sympathetic loan officer to push it through. Stephen logged directly into the executive portals of the 3 major credit bureaus. Working side by side, we initiated a total administrative freeze on my Social Security number. We locked down every line of credit, every revolving mortgage account, and every personal signature loan associated with my name. Anyone attempting to borrow a single dollar using my identity would immediately trigger a federal fraud alert. But freezing the credit was only a temporary shield. Justin and Amanda were clearly escalating their timeline. They were preparing to legally strip me of my autonomy. We needed an offensive maneuver that would permanently sever their access to the estate. Stephen pulled up a blank trust template on his screen. He explained that we were going to place the house, the property, and every liquid asset I possessed into an irrevocable blind trust. By doing this, I would legally relinquish direct ownership of the estate to the trust itself. Even if Justin somehow managed to get a judge to declare me mentally incompetent, he would inherit absolute control over nothing. The assets would be locked behind a legal firewall that no family court could breach. We spent the next hour drafting the parameters. I named a neutral third-party corporate fiduciary as the primary trustee. I stripped Amanda of any status as a beneficiary. I completely excised her name from the documentation. With every keystroke, I felt another emotional tie severing. I was systematically dismantling the inheritance she believed she was entitled to. There was a critical vulnerability in our plan. Filing an irrevocable blind trust and transferring property deeds usually took weeks of administrative processing through the county clerk. We did not have weeks. Justin had already submitted a forged power of attorney. If the county clerk processed his fraudulent document before our trust was legally codified, we would be trapped in a brutal, protracted legal battle. I told Stephen we needed the trust certified and sealed by the end of the day. Stephen leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the ceiling. He told me that skipping the county backlog was practically impossible without raising massive red flags. Then he looked down at me and smiled a grim, calculating smile. He reminded me of a specific county judge presiding over the property courts. 10 years ago, during a massive audit of municipal contracts, I had uncovered a systemic embezzlement ring that was quietly draining the county pension funds. The lead suspect had been a powerful construction contractor who was very close to destroying the retirement savings of hundreds of civil servants, including that exact judge. I had spent 6 months meticulously tracking the stolen funds, ensuring the contractor went to federal prison, and the pensions were fully restored. I had never asked for a favor in return. I simply did my job. Stephen picked up his private cell phone. He told me that the judge had an incredibly long memory and a deep appreciation for the man who saved his retirement. Stephen bypassed the court clerks and called the judge's private chambers directly. He did not mention Amanda or Justin. He simply stated that Gary Foster required an immediate quiet certification of an asset protection trust to prevent a hostile financial takeover. The judge did not hesitate. He owed me a debt that could finally be repaid. He instructed Stephen to route the encrypted files directly to his personal terminal. He promised to sign and seal the trust documents himself before the courthouse closed at 5. We had effectively moved an entire mountain of bureaucracy in 10 minutes, completely securing my estate without alerting the enemy. With the physical assets safely locked behind a legal wall, Stephen turned his attention back to the forged power of attorney that Justin had used to apply for the reverse mortgage. He printed the digital copy and laid it flat on the desk. To execute a legal document of that magnitude, Justin needed an official witness. He needed a registered notary public to stamp the paper swearing, under penalty of perjury, that I had been physically present and of sound mind when the document was signed. Stephen pointed a silver pen at the blurry digital stamp at the bottom of the page. The name on the notary seal read Marcus Vance. Stephen opened a background investigation database and typed the name into the search bar. We watched the loading screen spin for a few agonizing seconds. The results populated, displaying a web of public records, social media links, and residential history. Stephen clicked on the family tree algorithm. The connection materialized instantly. Marcus Vance was not a random corrupt notary working out of a strip mall. He was Justin's first cousin on his mother's side. Justin had kept the conspiracy entirely within his own bloodline. He had convinced his cousin to risk a severe federal prison sentence by stamping a fraudulent legal document. They had forged my signature in a desperate bid to extract $150,000 from my home. The sheer audacity of the crime confirmed exactly how deep Justin's gambling debts really went. He was burning every bridge and breaking every law because he was completely out of time. But Justin's desperation did not end with a forged signature. Stephen kept digging. He warned me that men like Justin never rely on just one avenue of attack. If the reverse mortgage failed, Justin needed a backup plan to seize the estate. Stephen logged into the restricted family court docket system. He searched my legal name across all active county filings. The screen refreshed. A new restricted file appeared at the very bottom of the list. It had been submitted to the court clerk just 3 hours ago. Stephen clicked on the file, his face hardening into a mask of pure disgust. He turned the monitor so I could see the screen. It was a preliminary petition for emergency medical conservatorship. Justin had officially filed legal paperwork, claiming that my cognitive abilities had severely and rapidly deteriorated. He alleged that I was a danger to myself and that I was incapable of managing my own financial and medical affairs. He had petitioned the court to strip me of all legal autonomy and appoint him and Amanda as my permanent legal guardians. I stared at the hearing date stamped at the top of the petition. It was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning on the Monday immediately following the wedding. They were going to use the rehearsal dinner and the wedding ceremony as their final performance. They planned to gather the entire family smile for the cameras and secure my signature on whatever remaining documents they needed. Then, before the weekend was even over, they were going to march into a courtroom and declare me mentally incompetent. They had choreographed my entire execution perfectly. Stephen looked at me, waiting for a reaction. He asked if I wanted to call the police right now and have them arrested for the forged power of attorney. He said we had enough evidence to stop the wedding and put Justin in handcuffs before sunset. I shook my head. I looked at the digital copy of the conservatorship petition. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to smile in my face, take my money, and throw me away in front of a judge. Simply having them quietly arrested by a patrol car was not enough. It lacked the necessary symmetry. If they wanted to perform a public execution, I was going to give them the grandest stage possible. I told Stephen to let the petition stand. I told him to let the fraudulent reverse mortgage sit in the pending file. We were not going to stop the wedding. We were going to let them walk right up to the finish line completely blind to the fact that their target had already dismantled their entire operation. The legal shield was fully constructed. My money was protected. My home was untouchable. Now all that remained was the destruction of their illusion. I gathered my copies of the evidence and stood up from the leather chair. The audit was over. It was time to return home and welcome the wolves through the front door. I pulled into my driveway and parked the sedan. The heavy legal shield Stephen and I had just constructed was invisible, but I felt its weight anchoring my property to the bedrock. I barely had time to unlock the front door and step into the foyer when the crunch of tires on gravel broke the quiet of the neighborhood. I looked through the sidelight window. Justin's leased luxury SUV jerked to a halt behind my car. The doors swung open. Justin stepped out first, his face a tight mask of barely suppressed rage. He slammed his door. Amanda emerged from the passenger side, her movements fast and agitated. They had just discovered the reverse mortgage application was frozen. They needed $150,000 to keep Justin's kneecaps intact, and the bank had just slammed the vault shut in their faces, but they were not alone. A third man climbed out of the back seat. He wore a rumpled tweed blazer and carried a worn leather briefcase. He had the practiced, artificially soothing posture of a man accustomed to delivering bad news. This was the contingency plan, stepping onto my driveway. I did not panic. I reached into my chest pocket, unlocked my smartphone entirely, by touch, opened the voice memo application, and tapped record. I left the device tucked discreetly behind the fabric of my pocket, the microphone pointing directly at the front door. Then I let my shoulders slump. I relaxed my jaw. I let the sharp, calculating auditor fade away, replacing him with the tired, grieving widower they expected to find. I opened the door just as Justin raised his fist to knock. Amanda pushed her way inside before I could even offer a greeting. She did not hug me. Her eyes darted around the foyer, scanning the space as if she were already measuring it for a real estate listing. Justin stepped in right behind her, his forced smile looking more like a grimace. The third man followed, wiping his shoes on the mat with exaggerated politeness. "Dad." Amanda said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet cadence that made my stomach churn. We were just in the neighborhood looking at floral arrangements and decided to pop in. Justin brought a friend along. "This is Dr. Arthur Hayes. He is an old family friend of Justin's parents. We thought it would be nice for you to meet him before the wedding." I extended a shaking hand. Dr. Hayes took it in a firm, clinical grip. His eyes were cold, assessing me from head to toe. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Gary Hayes," said his tone dripping with practiced empathy. "Justin and Amanda speak of you constantly. They worry about you out here all alone in this big house." I offered a weak, confused smile. "It is just me and the memories," I murmured, letting my voice trail off into a sigh. They moved into the living room like an invading force. Justin immediately took a seat on the leather sofa, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. He was staring at the floor, safe hidden beneath the rug, completely unaware that I had already emptied it and discovered Amanda's theft. Amanda walked straight into the kitchen, loudly announcing that she was going to make a pot of coffee. She treated my home as if I had already been evicted. Dr. Hayes sat in the armchair opposite me. He placed his leather briefcase on the floor and crossed his legs. The interrogation began almost instantly, disguised as polite conversation. He asked me how long I had lived in the house. He asked if I ever found the maintenance overwhelming. Then the questions took a subtle, sharper turn. "Gary, Justin tells me you had a long career in state logistics," Hayes said, leaning forward. "That requires a very sharp mind. Do you ever find yourself forgetting the little things lately? Like where you put your car keys or what day of the week it is?" I let a look of mild embarrassment wash over my face. I looked down at my hands. "Oh, you know how it gets when you reach my age," I mumbled. "The days tend to blur together since Linda passed. Sometimes I go into a room and forget why I walked in there." Justin's bouncing legs stopped. He leaned forward, hanging on my every word. His desperation was palpable. Hayes offered a sympathetic nod, pulling a small notepad from his breast pocket. That is perfectly normal, Gary. But sometimes it helps to stay sharp. Tell me, do you handle your own finances, or do you have Justin and Amanda help you with the complicated paperwork? For instance, do you remember signing any large bank transfers recently? There it was. The probe. Justin needed to know if I had frozen the reverse mortgage intentionally or if the bank had flagged it as an automated security measure. I played my part flawlessly. I let my eyes widen in feigned panic. Bank transfers, I stammered, rubbing my forehead. I went to the bank this morning to fix the wedding money for Justin. Did I do something wrong? The teller gave me so many papers to sign. I get so confused by all those digital forms. Did I ruin the transfer? Justin let out a heavy, audible breath, believing my act completely. No, Dad, it is fine, Justin said quickly, shooting a triumphant look at Dr. Hayes. The bank just had a system error. We can handle the paperwork for you from now on. You do not need to stress yourself out with those heavy financial decisions. We are going to take over all of that for you. Amanda walked back into the living room carrying a tray with coffee mugs. She set it down on the coffee table right next to my favorite reading chair. I had left my reading glasses sitting exactly where they always were, resting on top of a stack of mail. I watched Amanda out of the corner of my eye. As she leaned over to distribute the mugs, her hand swiftly brushed over the stack of mail. With the practiced sleight of hand of a pickpocket, she scooped up my reading glasses and slipped them directly into the side pocket of her designer purse. She stood back up, smiling brightly. Dad, I brought the final catering menu for the rehearsal dinner, she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her bag. The caterer needs your signature on the bottom line to confirm the head count. Could you look it over right now? I reached toward the stack of mail where my glasses had been just seconds before. My fingers brushed empty air. I patted the table. I patted my shirt pockets. I looked under the magazines. I let my breathing quicken, simulating a rising panic. I cannot find my glasses, I muttered, looking around the room with wide, frightened eyes. I just had them. They were right here. I am sure they were right here. Amanda knelt beside my chair. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip tightening painfully. Dad, she said, her voice dripping in loud, exaggerated concern, designed specifically for Dr. Hayes to hear. You did this yesterday, remember? You keep losing things. Your mind is slipping, Dad. You are becoming a danger to yourself. You left the stove on last week, remember? I had not left the stove on. It was a complete fabrication, a blatant lie manufactured right in front of a witness. I looked at her, letting my lower lip tremble. I did not leave the stove on, Amanda, I whispered, sounding exactly like a frightened child. Dr. Hayes scribbled furiously on his notepad. Gary, memory loss can be very disorienting, Hayes said softly, stepping fully into his role. Sometimes our brains create false realities to protect us from the truth of our decline. It is very common in advanced stages of cognitive degeneration. Amanda is just looking out for your safety. Justin stood up, pacing the room, playing the part of the stressed, overwhelmed caretaker. It is getting worse every day, Arthur Justin lied, running a hand through his hair. He forgets where he is. He gets agitated. We are terrified he is going to wander out into the street and get hurt. We just want him to be safe. We need to secure his assets so he cannot accidentally sign them away to a scammer. I sat frozen in my chair, staring blankly at the floor, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated evil of the performance happening in my living room. They were building a real-time medical history to present to the judge on Monday morning. Amanda stealing my glasses was a prop. Justin lying about my wandering was a narrative foundation. Dr. Hayes was the official rubber stamp. They were burying me alive, throwing dirt on my coffin while I was sitting right next to them. But as I sat there acting like a broken, senile old man, I was conducting a relentless, silent audit of the enemy. I studied Dr. Hayes. I noted the frayed edges of his tweed jacket, the scuffed leather of his shoes, and the cheap plastic watch on his wrist. A successful practicing physician does not wear a $20 watch or scuffed shoes. A successful neurologist does not make house calls to evaluate a stranger without a formal clinical appointment. Hayes was not a friend of the family. He was a mercenary. Justin had likely found him in the same gutter where he found his sports betting syndicates. I leaned back in the chair and let out a long, defeated sigh. "I am just so tired," I whispered, closing my eyes. "I just want everything to be handled. I do not want to be a burden to you, Amanda." Amanda patted my knee. "You are not a burden, Dad," she lied smoothly. "We are going to get you the help you need. Justin has a lovely facility picked out. You will have round-the-clock care. You will not have to worry about a single thing ever again." They stayed for another 20 minutes. Hayes asked me a few more rudimentary questions, making a show of flashing a penlight in my eyes and asking me to count backward from 100. I purposely stumbled on the numbers in the 80s. I gave them exactly what they needed to secure their false diagnosis. When they finally stood up to leave, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Justin's tense, angry posture had completely vanished. He looked relieved, almost euphoric. He believed he had won. He believed the reverse mortgage glitch was just a temporary hurdle and that the medical conservatorship on Monday was a guaranteed victory. He clapped Dr. Hayes on the back as they walked toward the front door. "Thank you so much for coming out." "Arthur," Justin said loudly, "I know your schedule at the hospital is packed." "Anything for family," Justin Hayes replied, his hand resting on the doorknob. "Gary needs immediate intervention. I will have my evaluation drafted and submitted to the court clerk by the end of the day." Amanda turned back to look at me one last time. She did not look at me with pity. She looked at me the same way a vulture looks at a dying animal. "We will see you at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night, Dad," she said. "Do not forget to bring your favorite pen. We have those trust papers for you to sign before the speeches." I offered a frail nod. "I will not forget, sweetheart," I rasped. The heavy wooden door pulled shut. The latch clicked into place. I stood entirely motionless in the center of the foyer, listening to the heavy footsteps crunch across the gravel driveway. I heard the doors of the luxury SUV slam shut. I heard the engine roar to life and the tires tear away down the street. The second the sound of their engine faded into the distance, my trembling stopped. My slumped posture snapped straight. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen displayed a continuous red recording bar. 47 minutes of high-definition audio. I hit stop and saved the file. They thought they had just secured a medical execution. They had no idea they had just handed a veteran fraud investigator a recorded confession of conspiracy to commit elder abuse. I did not waste a single second. I forwarded the encrypted audio file directly to Stephen's secure server. I typed out a rapid text message. "The doctor's name is Arthur Hayes. He is a fraud. Track his medical license history immediately. We need to know exactly why he is desperate enough to sell a fake diagnosis." The gaslighting trap was perfectly documented. The psychological warfare they thought would break me had only provided the exact ammunition I needed to destroy them in open court. But the conflict was far from over. Justin was running out of time. His creditors were not going to wait for a judge to sign a conservatorship order on Monday. They wanted their money now, and Justin was standing on the edge of a violent cliff. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. It was time to find out exactly who was holding Justin's leash. It was time to follow my son-in-law into the dark. The taillights of Justin's leased SUV vanished down the street, and the oppressive silence of my empty house rushed back in to surround me. I did not move from the foyer. I stood perfectly still, letting the reality of the last hour wash over me. I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and stopped the recording. The audio file was exactly 47 minutes long. It captured every patronizing insult, every manufactured lie, and every desperate coordinated attempt by my own daughter and her fiancé to paint me as a man losing his grip on reality. It captured the voice of a supposed medical professional actively participating in my psychological execution. I attached the audio file to a secure encrypted message and sent it directly to Stephen's private server. I typed a single accompanying sentence demanding he find out exactly who Arthur Hayes really was. I walked into the kitchen and poured the lukewarm coffee Amanda had made down the drain. I rinsed the mug meticulously, scrubbing the ceramic as if I could wash away the residue of her feigned affection. Every second that ticked by felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. They thought they had secured my submission. They believed they had established the perfect medical foundation to strip away my autonomy and seize my estate. My phone vibrated against the granite countertop before I could even reach for a towel to dry my hands. It was Stephen. He did not bother with a polite greeting. His voice was sharp, cutting through the static with the ruthless precision of a scalpel. Stephen told me he had immediately pulled the state medical board registry the moment he received my message. He had run the name Arthur Hayes through the active licensing database, the disciplinary archives, and the National Practitioner Databank. Hayes was not a board-certified neurologist. He was not a practicing physician. He was a disgraced, unlicensed criminal. 12 years ago, Hayes had his medical license permanently revoked by the state medical board for operating a highly lucrative illicit prescription pill mill out of a dilapidated suburban clinic. He had avoided a lengthy federal prison sentence only by turning state's evidence against the underground pharmacy network that supplied him. Since avoiding prison, he had been reduced to an untethered mercenary, a desperate man willing to forge signatures and manufacture clinical diagnoses for anyone willing to pay him under the table in unmarked cash. The pieces aligned with sickening perfection. Justin did not have the financial resources or the clean background to hire a legitimate practicing neurologist to evaluate me. A real doctor would have seen right through their pathetic charade instantly. A real doctor would have conducted a battery of tests and recognized that my cognitive faculties were vastly sharper than Justin's entirely. So Justin sought out the only kind of professional he could afford. A disgraced fraud drowning in his own desperate circumstances, someone willing to sell his soul to validate a false narrative. Justin's offshore sports betting debts were crushing him, and he was using the very dregs of the criminal underworld to orchestrate my demise, bringing a convicted felon straight into my living room to sit across from me. Stephen did not pause to let the reality of that invasion settle. The tone of his voice hardened, signaling that the worst news was yet to come. He told me that discovering Hayes's revoked license was merely the first layer of the crisis. While I was sitting in my kitchen scrubbing Amanda's coffee mug, Stephen had continuously monitored the live family court docket. 10 minutes ago, the automated system had registered a new, expedited electronic filing under my legal name. Justin had not waited. He had not paused to verify if his performance had truly convinced me, or if I harbored any lingering suspicions. The moment they pulled out of my driveway, Justin had electronically submitted Hayes's signed, sworn medical declaration of my severe cognitive decline directly to the presiding judge's clerk. The forged document was now officially on the public record. It legally corroborated Justin's preliminary petition for emergency medical conservatorship. The court system, a slow, blind, and relentless bureaucratic machine, recognized the paperwork as legitimate and complete. Stephen read the screen aloud to me, his voice tight with tension, confirming that the judge had officially docketed the emergency hearing for Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. The trap was no longer a theoretical threat looming in the distance. It was a legally binding reality rapidly closing in around my throat. By Monday morning, a judge would look at the forged medical records, look at my daughter's tearful, practiced testimony about my failing memory, and strip me of my constitutional rights. I would be legally erased, rendered a ward of the state, and my home, my accounts, and my legacy would be handed over to a desperate gambler. I gripped the edge of the granite counter, the cold stone grounding me in the present moment. Stephen asked me what our next move was, suggesting we immediately file an emergency injunction and have Hayes arrested for perjury before the sun went down. I told him no. I told him an injunction would only delay the inevitable, alerting Justin that we knew his playbook and forcing him to find a faster, potentially violent solution to satisfy his violent creditors. I instructed Stephen to prepare the final blind trust documents for my immediate signature and to coordinate directly with the event planner, Valerie. We were not going to stop their momentum. We were going to let them sprint blindly toward the edge of the cliff they had built for me. I hung up the phone. The house was dead quiet again, but the silence no longer terrified me. It felt like the calm, heavy center of a hurricane waiting to unleash absolute devastation. The drive away from my lawyer's office was automatic. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was entirely focused on the rapidly accelerating timeline of Justin's desperation. He had forged a medical document. He had attempted to drain the equity from my house. He had filed a petition to strip me of my legal autonomy. These were not the actions of a man who was comfortably waiting for an inheritance. These were the frantic, flailing maneuvers of a man who was out of time. I needed to see the exact nature of the threat pressing against him. I needed to look at the faces of the men holding his leash. I parked my unremarkable sedan a block away from Justin and Amanda's luxury downtown apartment building and settled in to wait. It did not take long. Within an hour, Justin hurried out of the glass lobby doors alone. His posture was rigid, his head on a swivel. He practically sprinted to his leased SUV and merged aggressively into the late afternoon traffic. I pulled out and followed him, keeping a calculated distance of 2 cars between us. My 40 years as a state fraud investigator had taught me how to trail a suspect without ever drawing their gaze to the rearview mirror. Justin drove erratically, running yellow lights and swerving through lanes entirely consumed by panic. The route led us away from the polished financial district and deep into an industrial sector of the city, a decaying grid of cracked asphalt chain-link fences and abandoned manufacturing warehouses. Justin turned sharply into a massive, brutalist concrete parking garage. The structure was a towering relic, half empty, and bathed in the sickly yellow glow of flickering sodium bulbs. I killed my headlights, let him ascend the spiraling ramp, and parked my vehicle on the ground level. I took the concrete stairs 2 at a time, my footsteps completely silent against the concrete. I slipped behind a row of heavy structural pillars on the 3rd level, blending seamlessly into the dense shadows. Justin was standing 20 yards away, pacing frantically beside his vehicle. He pulled at the collar of his designer shirt, checking his expensive watch every few seconds. The echoing screech of tires announced the arrival of the collection agents. A heavy dark sedan roared up the ramp and slammed on its brakes, blocking Justin's SUV perfectly inside its parking space. 2 men stepped out of the vehicle. They did not wear business suits, and they did not carry briefcases. They moved with the heavy, blunt efficiency of men who were paid exclusively to inflict physical pain. I slid my smartphone from my jacket pocket, raising it just enough to clear the edge of the concrete pillar. I tapped the screen and let the camera record the scene playing out under the harsh yellow lights. The larger of the 2 men did not waste a single breath on a greeting. He walked directly up to Justin, grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive jacket, and violently slammed him backward. Justin hit the concrete pillar with a sickening thud. The breath was completely knocked out of his lungs. The second man stepped in close, invading his personal space, and spoke in a low, dangerous rumble that echoed perfectly through the quiet garage. He told Justin that their employer was tired of waiting. He mentioned a high-stakes margin call that was already 3 days past due. He promised Justin in a tone entirely devoid of emotion that if the illicit account was not settled in full by the end of the week, they would not just repossess his car. They would shatter both of his knees. Justin was terrified. His arrogant, polished facade completely crumbled, leaving behind nothing but a whimpering coward. He held his hands up in a defensive posture, stammering and begging them to listen. He pleaded for time, begging them to wait just until Saturday. His voice bounced off the concrete walls, high-pitched and reeking of sheer desperation. He swore to the men that his idiot father-in-law was signing over the entire family estate at the wedding rehearsal dinner on Friday night. Justin promised them that the property was completely unencumbered and that he was liquidating the estate on Saturday morning. He guaranteed the men a payout of $500,000 if they would just grant him 48 more hours of breathing room. The two enforcers stared at him with dead, unconvinced eyes. The larger man finally released his brutal grip, letting Justin slump weakly against the pillar. He leaned in and told Justin that he had until noon on Saturday, and if the promised money was not transferred by then, there would be nowhere left on earth for him to hide. The men stepped back. Justin practically crawled into his luxury SUV, his hands shaking so violently he could barely manage to start the engine. He threw the heavy vehicle into reverse, nearly scraping the concrete wall, and sped out of the garage, the screech of his tires fading rapidly down the spiraling exit ramps. The two enforcers remained standing near the hood of their dark sedan. They pulled out cigarettes, lighting them in unison, their faces briefly illuminated by the orange flare of their lighters. I lowered my phone and saved the video recording to my secure cloud server. This was the moment a normal man would turn away. This was the moment a normal father would run to the authorities and beg for police protection. I did not retreat. I stepped out from behind the safety of the concrete pillar and walked directly into the pool of yellow light. The two enforcers snapped to attention, immediately dropping their cigarettes onto the concrete. Their hands moved instinctively toward their waistbands, evaluating the sudden threat. I did not break my stride and I did not raise my hands. I walked toward them with the absolute terrifying calm of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I stopped exactly 6 feet away from the front bumper of their sedan. The larger man demanded to know who I was and what I was doing, creeping around in the dark. I reached slowly into the inner pocket of my jacket. The men tensed, their muscles coiled tight and ready for violence. Instead of drawing a weapon, I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I held it out toward them. I told them my name was Gary Foster. I told them I was the idiot father-in-law that Justin had just promised to rob blind. The enforcers exchanged a confused, wary look. Their aggressive posture faltered for a fraction of a second. I did not give them time to recover. I explained that I knew exactly who they worked for and exactly how much money my son-in-law owed their offshore syndicate. I told them I had been standing in the shadows, listening to Justin attempt to buy his own life, using a house he did not own and money he would never possess. The second man stepped forward, jutting his chin out in a pathetic attempt to intimidate me. He told me that if I was the father-in-law, I had better have brought my checkbook to clear the outstanding debt. I looked the man dead in the eye and did not blink. I told him in a voice that felt like absolute zero that I was not paying a single dime of Justin's gambling debts. I tossed the heavy manila envelope onto the hood of their dark sedan. I told them to open it. I told them they were businessmen, and as businessmen, they deserved to know when an asset was entirely worthless. The larger man picked up the envelope and pulled out the stack of heavily audited documents. I stood my ground and explained exactly what they were looking at. I pointed to the first document stating it was the state corporate registry filing, proving Justin's supposedly lucrative tech startup was a hollow shell company with zero generated revenue. I pointed to the second document, explaining it was a verified copy of a pawn shop intake slip, proving Justin was forcing his fiancée to sell stolen family jewelry just to make his minimum interest payments. Then I pointed to the third and final document. I told them, my voice hardening into ice, that it was a certified legal decree proving the Foster estate was permanently locked inside an irrevocable blind trust. I watched the realization wash over the faces of the two enforcers as their eyes scanned the highlighted legal text. I told them the house was legally untouchable. I explained that even if Justin miraculously managed to murder me in my sleep tonight, the terms of the trust dictated that the estate would immediately be liquidated and every single dollar would be donated anonymously to charity. I made it absolutely and entirely clear that Justin had been lying to their faces. Justin had no leverage. Justin had no secret real estate payout coming on Saturday morning. I told them Justin was a cornered rat who would tell them any lie necessary to survive the weekend, and when Saturday morning finally arrived, Justin would be on a one-way flight to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving them empty-handed. The atmosphere in the brutalist parking garage shifted instantaneously. The heavy physical threat radiating from the two enforcers was no longer directed at me. The violent energy was entirely redirected toward the man who had just played them for fools. The larger man shoved the audit papers violently back into the manila envelope, his jaw clenching with lethal, unadulterated intent. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He asked me why I was handing over this highly sensitive information. He wanted to know why a father was willingly selling out his own flesh and blood to the criminal underworld. I did not smile. I did not show an ounce of mercy. I simply stated that a parasite is not family. I told the men they could handle their collection business however they saw fit, but they would absolutely not use my life savings to balance their illicit ledgers. I turned my back on the two enforcers, refusing to offer them another word, and walked slowly toward the concrete stairwell. My footsteps echoed sharply against the cold floor. I knew exactly what I had just unleashed. By removing the false promise of the estate payout, I had systematically stripped Justin of his only remaining shield. I had weaponized his own creditors against him, ensuring that when the grand illusion finally shattered at the rehearsal dinner, Justin would have absolutely nowhere left to run. The board was set. The pieces were locked. I walked out into the fading daylight, ready to deliver the final blow. The morning sun crawled across the hardwood floors of my living room, but it brought absolutely no warmth to the house. The wedding was exactly 2 days away. 48 hours remained until the grand illusion Justin and Amanda had constructed was scheduled to reach its absolute climax. I sat in my reading chair, sipping black coffee and watching the dust motes dance in the shafts of light filtering through the blinds. My mind was a cold, calculating engine continuously running the variables of the impending collision. I knew Justin was currently sweating through his tailored suits, terrified of the violent men waiting for their money in that concrete parking garage. I knew the disgraced physician Arthur Hayes had already filed his fraudulent medical evaluation with the county court. The pieces of their snare were fully deployed and waiting in the shadows. They only needed one final component to spring the trap completely. They needed my physical signature. Right on schedule, the doorbell chimed. It was not a hesitant ring. It was 2 sharp, authoritative bursts echoing through the quiet foyer. I did not need to check the security cameras to know who was standing on my front porch. I set my coffee mug on the side table and walked slowly down the hallway, letting my shoulders round slightly, allowing my gait to mimic the physical decline they expected to see. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Amanda stood on the welcome mat. She wore a pristine white summer dress and carried a thick leather portfolio under her left arm. She looked absolutely radiant, completely untouched by the criminal conspiracy she was actively orchestrating behind my back. "Hi, Dad," Amanda said, her voice bright and chirpy, completely devoid of the tension that should accompany a daughter attempting to legally erase her father. "I know it is early, but I wanted to drop by before the wedding madness completely takes over our schedule. I brought pastries from that little bakery you love." I offered a weak, confused smile, letting my hands tremble just slightly as I pushed the door wider to let her inside. "That is very thoughtful of you, Amanda," I murmured, stepping aside. I was just sitting in the living room trying to remember what day it was. The days seemed to run together lately. Amanda walked past me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. She did not head toward the living room. She marched directly into the kitchen, the tactical center of the house, and placed her heavy leather portfolio right in the middle of the granite island. She set the small pastry box to the side, an afterthought in her grand design. She unzipped the portfolio and extracted a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy, expensive paper. She smoothed the pages flat with the palm of her hand, her manicured nails tapping against the crisp white sheets. "Dad, come sit down for a minute," Amanda called out, patting the stool next to her. "Justin and I were talking last night, and we want to make sure you are completely protected. We know how overwhelming things have been for you lately. Losing your glasses, forgetting appointments, struggling with the bank transfers. We do not want you to stress about any of that anymore." I walked into the kitchen and slowly lowered myself onto the wooden stool. I looked down at the stack of papers. The header on the first page was printed in bold black ink. It read, "Irrevocable Family Wealth Management Trust and Master Power of Attorney." It was exactly what Stephen had warned me about. They were not waiting for the judge on Monday morning. They wanted my signature on a secondary set of documents right now, just in case the medical conservatorship encountered a legal delay. They needed to guarantee Justin had immediate unrestricted access to my liquid assets by Saturday. "What is all this, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and laced with a pathetic layer of manufactured confusion. Amanda smiled, leaning closer to me, her voice adopting the patronizing, soothing tone of a kindergarten teacher, explaining a simple concept to a slow child. "It is just a family trust, Dad. It is a protective measure. Justin had his corporate lawyers drafted up as a favor to us. It basically just puts my name and Justin's name next to yours on all the estate documents. That way, if you ever forget to pay a bill or if you get confused at the bank, Justin can just step in and handle it for you. It takes all the burden off your shoulders." I stared down at the documents, my eyes scanning the dense legal paragraphs. I did not need to read the fine print to know exactly what clauses were buried inside. I had spent 40 years auditing corporate contracts designed to hide theft in plain sight. I knew that by signing the final page, I would be granting Justin immediate unilateral authority to liquidate my investment portfolios, drain my checking accounts, and leverage the deed to my home. I would be willingly handing the keys to my entire life over to a degenerate gambler who owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to violent criminals. I reached out and touched the edge of the paper, letting my fingers trace the thick stock. "Do I have to sign this right now?" I asked, looking up at her with wide, fearful eyes. "It is just so much reading, Amanda. My eyes get so tired and I cannot focus on all these big words today." Amanda's smile tightened at the corners, a microscopic fracture in her patient facade. Justin's deadline was ticking in her ear, and my hesitation was an unacceptable delay. She reached out and placed her hand over mine, pinning my fingers against the fraudulent contract. "You do not need to read it, Dad," Amanda said, her voice dropping an octave, the sweetness replaced by a firm, commanding edge. "I am your daughter. I would never ask you to sign anything that was not in your absolute best interest. We are just looking out for you. You need us to manage things now. You are not as sharp as you used to be, and it is dangerous for you to handle your own finances. We are doing this to keep you safe." She leaned down and wrapped her arms around my shoulders, pulling me into a deep embrace. I felt the fabric of her expensive dress against my cheek. I smelled the heavy floral notes of her designer perfume filling my lungs. I sat perfectly still, trapped inside the poisoned embrace of my own child. As her arms squeezed me tight, I felt a profound, sickening wave of absolute clarity wash over my mind. I kept my eyes open, staring blankly at the kitchen wall over her shoulder. I tried desperately to search my memory for the little girl I had raised. I remembered sitting on the floor of her bedroom, assembling a wooden dollhouse until 2 a.m. on her 7th birthday. I remembered the fierce, unyielding pride I felt when she walked across the stage to accept her university diploma, a degree I had paid for by working 60-hour weeks for 4 straight years. I remembered the absolute, unconditional trust she used to look at me with whenever she was frightened or hurt. I searched for a single remaining fragment of that child. I searched for a shred of empathy, a flicker of hesitation, a momentary pause of guilt for what she was doing to her only living parent. I found absolutely nothing. Amanda pulled back from the hug, keeping her hands resting on my shoulders. She looked down into my eyes, waiting for my compliance. I looked back into her eyes and saw the absolute truth. I was not looking at my daughter. My daughter was dead. The woman standing in my kitchen was a predator staring back at me, calculating the butcher's bill. She was looking at my skin and seeing nothing but dollar signs. She was looking at my house and seeing a bargaining chip to save a worthless man from his own consequences. The final thread of my paternal mercy snapped completely, severing cleanly and permanently. "You are right, Amanda." I whispered, my voice entirely hollow. "I am just so tired. I trust you. I trust Justin. I will sign whatever you need me to sign." Amanda let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping in visible relief. She reached for the silver pen tucked inside the leather portfolio. "Oh, thank God, Dad," she said, smiling genuinely for the first time since she walked through the door. "This is going to make everything so much easier for all of us. Just sign right here at the bottom of the last page." I held up my hand, stopping her before she could hand me the pen. I let a small, trembling smile touch my lips. "But I do not want to sign it right now," I said softly. "If this is a family trust, I want to do it right. I want to sign it tomorrow night at the rehearsal dinner." Amanda frowned, her hand hovering over the paper. At the rehearsal dinner, she repeated, her tone laced with confusion and a hint of panic. "Dad, it is just a stack of legal forms. It is not a ceremony. We really need to get this filed with the lawyers before the weekend. Justin is very anxious to get this finalized." I shook my head slowly, playing the role of the stubborn, sentimental old man perfectly. "No, Amanda, I insist. I am handing over the family legacy to you and Justin. I want to do it in front of everyone. I want to make a speech. I want to stand up at the country club tomorrow night in front of Justin's parents and all our friends and officially welcome him into the family by signing these papers. It will be a symbol of our united family. It is the only way I will do it." I watched her mind work. I watched the gears turning behind her eyes as she weighed the options. She knew pushing me too hard right now might cause me to panic and refused to sign altogether. She also knew that Justin needed the money by Saturday noon. Signing the papers on Friday night at the rehearsal dinner still gave them enough time to execute the transfers on Saturday morning. Furthermore, my suggestion fed directly into her massive ego. The idea of me standing up in front of a crowded banquet hall and publicly declaring my submission to her and Justin was too tempting to resist. It was the ultimate display of dominance. Amanda slowly slid the pen back into its leather loop. She zipped the portfolio closed and offered me a brilliant, triumphant smile. "That is actually a really beautiful idea, Dad," she said, picking up the leather binder. "Justin will absolutely love that. A public passing of the torch. We will make sure the photographer gets plenty of pictures." She leaned down and kissed me on the cheek. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I sat perfectly still as she walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I listened to the front door open and close. I listened to the engine of her car start and fade away down the quiet suburban street. The moment the house was silent, I stood up from the wooden stool. The tired, confused old man evaporated instantly, replaced entirely by the forensic auditor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I bypassed Stephen's number and opened my contacts list, scrolling past the wedding planners and caterers until I found the direct cell phone number for Valerie. Valerie was the senior event coordinator at the sprawling country club, where Amanda was hosting both the rehearsal dinner and the wedding reception. She was a meticulous, highly stressed professional who had been dealing with Amanda's relentless demands and Justin's arrogant dismissals for the past 6 months. I dialed the number and waited as it rang 3 times. Valerie answered, her voice tight and clipped clearly in the middle of a chaotic ballroom setup. "Gary," she said, her tone shifting to a polite but rushed greeting. "We are just finalizing the floral arrangements for tomorrow night. Is everything all right with the seating chart?" "Everything is perfectly fine, Valerie," I said, my voice dropping into a calm, authoritative cadence. "I am calling because I need to ask you for a very specific private favor regarding the audiovisual setup for the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night." Valerie hesitated. The background noise of clinking silverware and shouting vendors faded slightly as she presumably walked into a quieter hallway. "What kind of favor, Gary?" Amanda gave me extremely strict instructions regarding the run of show for tomorrow evening. She explicitly locked the itinerary. She does not want any deviations from the schedule. "I know she did, Valerie," I replied smoothly. "But I am the father of the bride, and I am planning a surprise presentation for my daughter and my new son-in-law. I have put together a special visual display that I need projected onto the main screens in the banquet hall during my toast. I need complete, unrestricted access to the control booth And I need your audio technician to route the main display feed directly to my personal tablet. Gary. I really cannot do that. Valerie sighed, the stress radiating through the phone. Amanda threatened to withhold our final gratuity payment if anything goes wrong, or if there are any unapproved surprises. The control booth is strictly off-limits to guests. I did not argue. I did not attempt to appeal to her emotions or her sense of romance. I treated the interaction exactly like a corporate negotiation. I knew exactly what motivated people who worked in high-stress service industries for ungrateful clients. Valerie, I am currently looking at the final billing statement for this wedding. I said, my voice cold and entirely transactional. I am the sole signatory on the primary accounts funding this entire event. I know Amanda has been incredibly difficult to deal with. I know Justin treats your staff like completely disposable assets. I am going to make this very simple for you. If you ensure that I have absolute control over the audiovisual system tomorrow night, and you ensure that Justin and Amanda are completely locked out of the control booth until my presentation is finished, I will wire $10,000 directly into your personal checking account. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The background noise of the country club seemed to vanish entirely. $10,000 was triple her standard flat rate for an entire weekend of event coordination. It was an amount of money that completely bypassed protocol and shattered any loyalty she had to Amanda's strict itinerary. I will have the cash transferred within the hour, I added, ensuring the hook was perfectly set. No one will ever know we had this conversation. You just have to make sure my tablet connects to the main screens when I step up to the microphone. Valerie swallowed hard, the sound clearly audible over the cellular connection. Gary, she whispered, her professional resistance completely crumbling under the weight of the bribe. The control booth will be unlocked and empty at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. The main HDMI feed will be resting on the podium right next to the microphone. You plug in your tablet and you own the room. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I stood alone in the kitchen looking at the empty space on the granite island where Amanda's fraudulent portfolio had rested just minutes before. They wanted a public passing of the torch. They wanted me to stand up in front of an audience of their peers and officially surrender my life to their control. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to plug my tablet into the main feed and project 47 minutes of hidden audio forged medical documents and brutal parking garage extortion videos onto 30-foot high-definition screens. I was going to turn their elegant rehearsal dinner into a public autopsy. The sun dipped below the horizon, taking the last remnants of warmth from the house. It was Thursday evening, the eve of the rehearsal dinner. The silence that settled over the empty rooms did not feel heavy or oppressive anymore. It felt entirely clinical. I sat at the heavy oak desk in my home office, surrounded by the glow of 3 computer monitors. I was not a father preparing to give away his only daughter. I was a senior forensic auditor preparing to dismantle a corrupt enterprise. The architectural blueprints of my defense were already laid out and fortified. Stephen had secured the irrevocable blind trust. The county judge had sealed the perimeter. But a fortress is only effective if the vaults inside are completely secure. The physical estate was untouchable, but my liquid assets remained tethered to domestic institutions that were inherently vulnerable to judicial overreach. If Justin somehow managed to manipulate a sympathetic judge on Monday morning, those domestic accounts would be frozen instantly. I needed to remove the oxygen from the room before the fire could even start. I opened a secure encrypted terminal on my primary monitor. The screen displayed the aggregated balance of my entire life savings. Decades of sensible investments, municipal bonds, and retirement dividends sat in a vulnerable pile of digital currency. It was the exact pool of wealth that Amanda and Justin were planning to drain to cover his illicit debts. I did not feel a single tremor of hesitation as I initiated the primary transfer protocols. I opened a secondary terminal linking directly to an offshore banking institution located in a jurisdiction that absolutely refused to recognize domestic civil court orders. Stephen and I had established the shell account years ago as a theoretical exercise in asset protection. Tonight I was making it fully operational. I selected my primary domestic checking account. I typed the routing numbers with steady, deliberate keystrokes. I authorized a wire transfer that would sweep the entire balance, leaving exactly $0.00 behind. I confirmed the transfer authorization using a biometric scan. The system processed the request. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen. It took exactly 45 seconds for a lifetime of financial accumulation to completely vanish from the domestic grid. I repeated the process for my high-yield savings account. I liquidated my mutual funds, paying the early withdrawal penalties without a second thought. A penalty fee was simply the cost of doing business when executing a rapid asset relocation. Within 20 minutes, my entire financial footprint in the United States had been systematically erased. If Justin tried to hack my accounts or subpoena my banks on Monday, he would find nothing but a barren digital wasteland. The money was gone completely beyond his reach, locked in an offshore vault where only my personal cryptographic key could authorize a withdrawal. The financial bleeding was permanently stopped. I shut down the monitors and pushed my chair away from the desk. The digital extraction was complete. It was time to prepare for the physical extraction. I walked down the quiet hallway to the master bedroom. I opened the closet and pulled out a single hard-shell suitcase. It was a practical piece of luggage scuffed at the corners from years of state-sponsored business trips. I placed it flat on the mattress and unzipped the main compartment. I did not pack a tuxedo for the wedding. I did not pack the sentimental ties my daughter had given me for Father's Day over the years. I packed strictly for utility. I packed 3 sets of sensible clothing. I packed a basic toiletry kit. Then I packed a collection of physical backup drives containing every piece of evidence I had gathered against Justin and Amanda. I carefully placed the copies of the pawnshop intake slips, the fraudulent reverse mortgage application, the medical conservatorship petition, and the 47-minute audio recording of their conspiracy into a waterproof sleeve. I was not packing for a family celebration. I was packing for a permanent departure. Once the presentation was finished tomorrow night, I was walking out of the country club, and I was never coming back to this house. The blind trust would immediately trigger a corporate sale of the property. The proceeds would be funneled directly into charitable endowments that I had quietly established earlier in the week. There would be no forwarding address. There would be no tearful goodbyes. I was systematically deleting my own existence from their world. I closed the suitcase and secured the heavy metal latches. I carried it back down the hall and set it by the front door. On my way back to the kitchen, I paused in front of the hallway credenza. Resting in the center of the polished wood was a silver-framed photograph. I stopped and looked at it. It was a picture of Linda taken exactly 3 months before the cancer finally pulled her away from me. She was smiling, her eyes bright and full of a profound, unyielding love. Beside her in the photograph was a younger version of Amanda, laughing and leaning into her mother's embrace. I stood in the quiet hallway, staring at the frozen image of my family. I waited for the familiar ache to rise in my chest. I waited for the tears to sting my eyes. I waited for the heavy, suffocating grief that usually accompanied any memory of my late wife. Absolutely nothing came. My chest was entirely hollow. My eyes were completely dry. I looked at the smiling face of my daughter in the photograph and felt absolutely no connection to her. The realization washed over me not as a tragedy, but as a cold mathematical truth. The family I thought I was protecting had not survived Linda's death. Linda had been the connective tissue, the warmth, the beating heart of our household. When she died, the family died with her. I had spent the last 4 years operating under the desperate delusion that I could keep the structure intact by simply giving Amanda whatever she wanted. I had confused financial enabling with fatherly love. I had allowed myself to become a silent bank vault, ignoring the toxic entitlement festering in my own home because confronting it would mean admitting that my family was truly gone. I reached out and gently picked up the silver frame. I did not throw it against the wall. I did not shatter the glass in a fit of rage. I simply laid it face down on the polished wood. I stripped away the very last illusion tying me to this house. I was no longer a father navigating a difficult relationship with a troubled daughter. I was an auditor finalizing the closure of a completely bankrupt account. The ledger was unbalanced, the assets were toxic, and the entity was officially dissolved. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I leaned against the granite island, looking out the window into the dark suburban street. My mind was completely clear. The emotional static had been entirely purged. I was ready for tomorrow night. I was ready to plug my tablet into the country club audiovisual system and burn their world to the ground. The silence of the kitchen was abruptly shattered by the sharp vibration of my smartphone against the granite countertop. I set my water glass down and picked up the device. The screen illuminated the dark room. It was a text message from Justin. I unlocked the screen and read the words glowing in bright white text against the black background. "Just wanted to check in on you, Gary," the message read. "We are so excited for tomorrow night. Do not forget to bring your favorite pen for the signing. See you at the club." I stared at the screen. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the message was staggering. He was not just reminding me to sign away my autonomy. He was mocking me. He was sitting in his luxury apartment sweating over his violent debts, and yet he still felt confident enough to patronize the man he was planning to destroy. He believed I was a senile, compliant fool who would happily march to the slaughter holding my favorite pen. He believed his forged medical documents and his fake doctor had secured his victory. He believed he was the apex predator playing a masterful game. He had no idea he was already a ghost. I did not type a response. I did not offer a polite confirmation or a comforting lie. I simply pressed the power button and let the screen go black. The final microscopic fraction of mercy I might have unknowingly harbored for my daughter and her fiancé completely evaporated. The text message had not just confirmed their intent. It had absolutely sealed their fate. They wanted my signature. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to stand in front of their friends and family and claim their stolen crown. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked back toward the front door. The suitcase was waiting. The offshore accounts were secured. The audio files were loaded onto the presentation tablet. Valerie had been bought and paid for ensuring the country club control booth was entirely mine. The trap was set and the steel jaws were locked open. I reached out and turned off the hallway light, plunging the house into total darkness. Tomorrow night, Justin and Amanda would get their public spectacle, and it would be the very last thing they ever saw. The heavy glass doors of the Oak Ridge Country Club opened into a sprawling ballroom, bathed in the warm amber glow of tiered crystal chandeliers. It was a monument to absolute excess and manufactured prestige. Justin had spared absolutely no expense for his rehearsal dinner, knowing that by Saturday morning, he planned to pay the final catering bill with my liquidated assets. 150 guests milled about the polished hardwood floor, holding flutes of expensive vintage champagne and picking at trays of imported caviar. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and extravagant floral arrangements that cascaded from every table in the room. I walked into the ballroom carrying my small digital tablet, tucked discreetly into the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I moved slowly, keeping my shoulders heavily slumped, and my gaze intentionally vacant, playing the role of the broken and defeated patriarch with perfect precision. Across the room near the sprawling open bar, Justin was holding court. He wore a bespoke velvet dinner jacket and flashed a brilliant, practiced white smile at everyone who approached him. He was surrounded by a tight circle of older men in conservative tailored suits, whom he was loudly introducing as primary investors in his latest technology startup. I stood quietly near a pillar and listened to him boast. I watched him gesture expansively, waving his hands as he confidently projected quarterly yields and aggressive international market expansion. He spoke with the absolute unwavering conviction of a seasoned con artist. The men holding their drinks nodded along, completely oblivious to the fact that the brilliant prodigy standing before them was actually drowning in 6 figures of illicit gambling debt. They did not know that this young visionary had just been shoved violently against a concrete pillar by unlicensed debt collectors exactly 24 hours ago. Justin was selling an elaborate illusion of massive success to hide the desperate, terrifying reality of his impending physical and financial ruin. Amanda spotted me standing near the entrance and immediately rushed over to intercept me. She wore a stunning emerald green evening gown that flowed flawlessly behind her, catching the light with every step. She wrapped her arm tightly around mine, leaning in close so the surrounding guests could see her playing the role of the devoted and exhausted caregiver. She spoke to me in a loud, slow voice as if I were entirely hard of hearing or incapable of understanding basic sentences. She guided me through the crowd, stopping every few feet, to introduce me to Justin's extended family and his wealthy colleagues. With every single introduction, she would offer a sad, pathetic little sigh and whisper loud enough for the guests to hear that my memory was slipping rapidly. She told them I was having a very hard time adjusting to reality, and that she and Justin were stepping up to manage my daily life because I could no longer be trusted to care for myself. She was actively polluting the room with her false narrative, ensuring every person in attendance viewed me as a fragile, senile prop. I played my part without a single misstep or break in character. I nodded vaguely at the guests and offered confused, harmless smiles to everyone Amanda introduced me to. I let my hands tremble visibly when I reached for a glass of water from a passing waiter. I watched the pity wash over the faces of Justin's wealthy relatives. They looked at me with a mixture of polite sorrow and quiet relief that they were not burdened with my daily care. I eventually sat down at the center of the head table next to Amanda, while the extravagant 5-course dinner was served to the room. I barely touched the expensive food placed on my plate. I simply stared at the large presentation stage constructed at the far end of the ballroom. A heavy wooden podium stood in the exact center, flanked on both sides by 2 massive 30-foot high-definition projector screens. Valerie, the event coordinator, stood near the shadowed entrance of the audiovisual control booth at the back of the room. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second and offered a single barely perceptible nod before stepping away. The $10,000 wire transfer had cleared my offshore account. The control booth was now locked from the inside, and the main display feed was sitting directly on the podium waiting for my device. No one else could access the system. The trap was fully armed and ready to spring. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cold, mechanical focus of an auditor taking over my entire nervous system. The clinking of silverware eventually faded as the dinner service concluded and the waitstaff cleared the tables. The ambient classical music was cut entirely from the overhead speakers. Justin's father stepped up to the stage to deliver the opening remarks for the evening. He spoke at length about his son's unmatched brilliance and the beautiful merging of 2 highly successful families. He spoke about legacy and the critical importance of trusting the next generation to carry the torch forward into the future. Every single word he spoke felt like a calculated layer of absolute irony, considering his son was currently attempting to steal my entire legacy to pay off criminal loan sharks. When he finished his speech, the room erupted in polite, enthusiastic applause. Justin stood up from his chair at the head table and smoothed the lapels of his velvet jacket. He walked to the center of the stage, taking the microphone with a practiced, charismatic ease that charmed the audience instantly. He thanked his parents, and he thanked his beautiful bride. Then he turned his gaze directly toward me. Justin told the crowd that tonight was not just about celebrating a marriage, but about securing a family. His voice echoed through the massive speakers, filling the ballroom with his manufactured sincerity. He spoke about how difficult the past few years had been for me since Linda passed away. He painted a tragic, beautiful picture of a grieving widower who desperately needed the support of his loving, capable daughter. He announced to the hushed room that as a symbol of our united front, I had decided to officially sign over the management of the family estate to him and Amanda tonight. He called it a beautiful passing of the torch. He gestured grandly for me to join him on the stage. The audience clapped softly, murmuring their profound approval at such a touching display of familial trust. Amanda placed a gentle, guiding hand on my back, helping me stand up from my chair. I shuffled slowly toward the stage, letting my steps drag heavily across the polished wood floor. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me. They saw an old man surrendering his autonomy to a capable young couple. I gripped the handrail and pulled myself up the short flight of stairs onto the raised platform. Justin was waiting for me at the wooden podium. His eyes were wide and burning with a feverish, frantic greed. The polished facade of the successful tech executive was cracking rapidly around the edges, revealing the terrified, desperate gambler underneath. The violent deadline from the concrete parking garage was screaming in his mind. He needed this signature right now to save his own life. I stepped behind the wooden podium. I looked out over the sea of faces staring back at me. 150 people dressed in their absolute best waiting patiently for a heartwarming display of family unity. I looked down at the flat surface of the podium. Resting exactly where Valerie promised it would be was a standard black cable connected directly to the primary audiovisual feed. Right next to the cable sat the thick leather portfolio Amanda had brought to my house the day before. Justin slid the portfolio toward me. He opened the cover, revealing the final page of the irrevocable trust document. He placed a heavy silver pen directly on top of the signature line. Justin leaned in close, placing his arm around my shoulder for the event photographers standing below the stage. He smiled broadly for the flashing cameras, while keeping his lips entirely frozen. He leaned his mouth close to my ear and whispered in a low, urgent hiss. "Sign the paper, Gary. Sign it right now and make it legible. Do not embarrass us in front of these people." His grip on my shoulder tightened painfully, a physical threat disguised as a loving familial embrace. He was vibrating with kinetic energy. He could practically feel the $150,000 he needed to save his life. I looked down at the heavy silver pen. I looked at the signature line that was designed to legally erase my entire existence. I did not pick up the pen. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out my small digital tablet. I kept it low hidden from the view of the crowd behind the raised wooden lip of the podium. I smoothly inserted the black cable into the side port of my device. A small green indicator light illuminated on the screen, confirming a direct, unhindered connection to the massive twin projectors flanking the stage. I swiped the screen with my thumb, opening the primary presentation folder. The first file in the queue was loaded and ready. I looked up from the podium and stared directly into the blinding stage spotlights. I took a deep, slow breath. I let my shoulders drop and snap backward. I straightened my spine, returning to my full physical height. The manufactured trembling in my hands vanished completely. The tired, confused old man was gone. I stepped up to the microphone. The execution was about to begin. I stood behind the heavy wooden podium and looked out over the sea of expectant faces. 150 of the most influential people in the city were staring back at me. They held their crystal champagne flutes and wore their finest evening gowns, waiting for the broken widower to officially surrender his life to the next generation. Justin stood to my left, hovering just inches away. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was practically vibrating with a toxic mixture of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated greed. He tapped his finger impatiently against the edge of the leather portfolio, pushing the heavy silver pen an inch closer to my hand. He wanted me to sign the irrevocable trust document immediately. He needed that signature to save his kneecaps from the violent men waiting for him in the brutalist parking garage. I ignored the silver pen. I leaned forward and adjusted the microphone, pulling it closer to my mouth. The low hum of feedback echoed through the massive ballroom, instantly silencing the low murmur of polite conversation. I looked at the crowd and began to speak. I kept my voice entirely steady, projecting a calm, absolute authority that belonged to a man who had spent 40 years dismantling corrupt corporate empires. I told the audience that tonight was supposed to be a celebration of legacy. I said that a family is not built on shared blood or shared wealth, but on a foundation of absolute truth and unwavering trust. I spoke about the sacrifices a father makes to provide a secure future for his children. I spoke about the profound expectation of mutual respect. The audience was captivated. Justin smiled broadly, a perfect picture of the proud, supportive son-in-law. Amanda stood near the edge of the stage, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the role of the overwhelmed, loving daughter. They were completely oblivious to the steel snare that was currently wrapping around their ankles. I looked past the wealthy investors in the front row. I looked past Justin's arrogant parents sitting at the head table. I locked my eyes directly on the shadowed glass of the audiovisual control booth at the very back of the ballroom. I gave Valerie the signal. I simply nodded my head once. Valerie executed her end of our $10,000 bargain with absolute, flawless precision. The soft ambient classical music that had been playing through the overhead speakers cut out instantly. The main ballroom chandeliers dimmed, plunging the elegant room into a heavy, dramatic twilight. The twin 30-foot high-definition projector screens flanking the stage blinked to life. A brilliant white light washed over the faces of the confused guests. Justin frowned, his perfect smile faltering as he looked up at the massive glowing screens. He leaned toward me and whispered a harsh command, asking what was going on and demanding I sign the paper right now. I did not look at him. I looked down at my digital tablet hidden safely behind the wooden lip of the podium. I tapped the screen and initiated the master file sequence. I did not need to offer an elaborate introduction. The evidence spoke for itself. The crisp, high-definition audio recording began to play through the country club surround sound system. It was not a speech. It was the exact conversation that had taken place in my living room 48 hours ago. Amanda's voice echoed through the ballroom, loud and completely stripped of her sweet public cadence. She was complaining about my existence. She was calling me a burden. Then Justin's voice filled the room, dripping with cold, ruthless calculation. The entire audience listened in absolute, horrified silence as Justin and Amanda openly discussed their plan to switch my medications and hide my belongings. They listened as my daughter and her fiancé methodically plotted to manufacture a fake medical history to have me permanently committed to a locked psychiatric ward. They discussed liquidating my estate. They laughed about disposing of my life. The atmosphere in the ballroom shattered. The polite smiles vanished from the faces of the wealthy investors. Justin's parents sat frozen in their chairs, their mouths hanging open in pure shock. I turned my head and looked at Amanda. Her silk handkerchief dropped to the floor. All the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow white porcelain doll. She took a staggering step backward, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Justin was completely paralyzed. His mind was struggling to process the catastrophic failure of his entire reality. He stared at the giant screens as if they were a terrifying hallucination. Before Justin could formulate a single word of defense or lunge for the power cables, I tapped my tablet screen a second time. The audio recording faded out, and the visual evidence took over. A massive high-resolution scan of the pawnshop intake slip materialized on both 30-foot screens. I leaned into the microphone, my voice echoing like a judge handing down a final sentence. I told the room that trust is easily broken when a family is built on a foundation of theft. I directed their attention to the document towering above us. I read the details aloud, ensuring every single investor and family member understood exactly what they were looking at. I explained that it was a verified collateral loan agreement from a pawnshop in the financial district. I pointed out the itemized list of goods. I told the crowd that the items fenced for a quick cash payout were my late wife's bespoke sapphire watch and her diamond wedding rings. I did not let the audience draw their own conclusions. I laid the narrative out bare. I told the room that my daughter had crept into my home and stolen her dead mother's jewelry to bail out a degenerate gambler. I explained that the brilliant tech executive standing next to me was actually drowning in 6 figures of illicit offshore sports betting debt. I announced to the room that Justin was currently being hunted by violent, unlicensed creditors, and that he had promised to use my stolen life savings to buy back his own life by noon on Saturday. The wealthy investors in the front row, the men Justin had been aggressively courting for venture capital, immediately began stepping backward away from the stage. They were predators in their own right, and they recognized the stench of a sinking ship. They looked at Justin not with pity, but with profound, absolute disgust. He was a massive liability. He was a fraud. Justin's father stood up from his chair, his face burning red with humiliation and fury, but he was entirely speechless. Amanda let out a strangled, sobbing gasp, shaking her head side to side in a pathetic attempt to deny the undeniable proof glowing 30 feet high in her own looping handwriting. Justin finally snapped out of his paralysis. His survival instinct triggered a massive surge of adrenaline. He took a threatening step toward me, his hands balling into tight fists, his eyes wide and manic. He told me to turn the screens off, his voice cracking with panic. He tried to claim the documents were forged. He tried to yell to the crowd that I was having a severe psychotic episode and that my mind was completely gone. He was clinging desperately to his original script, completely unaware that I was about to burn that script to ashes. I did not retreat. I tapped the tablet screen for the third and final time. The massive projectors transitioned to a split-screen display. On the left side of the screen was the preliminary petition for emergency medical conservatorship that Justin had filed with the county court just yesterday. It proudly bore the signature of Dr. Arthur Hayes. On the right side of the screen was a certified, heavily redacted document from the State Medical Board. I spoke into the microphone, my voice cutting through Justin's pathetic lies like a heavy steel blade. I told the audience that Justin had attempted to legally declare me incompetent using a sworn medical evaluation. Then I directed their attention to the document on the right. I read the State Medical Board's disciplinary ruling aloud. I informed the hushed ballroom that Dr. Arthur Hayes was not a neurologist. He was a disgraced, convicted felon who had his medical license permanently revoked over a decade ago for running a highly illegal prescription pill mill. I looked directly at Justin. I told him and the entire room that he had hired a desperate criminal to forge a medical diagnosis, because a real doctor would have immediately realized his entire scheme was a fraud. I explained that he had forged a power of attorney and attempted to take out a fraudulent reverse mortgage on my fully paid estate. I dismantled his entire opulent facade piece by piece, leaving absolutely nothing behind but a desperate, broke criminal standing on a stage he could not afford. The silence in the room was suffocating. There were no murmurs of disbelief. The documentation was irrefutable. It was a flawless, absolute execution. Justin realized in that agonizing, terrifying second that his life was completely over. The investors were gone. The inheritance was a phantom. His creditors were coming for him tomorrow, and he had absolutely no money to save himself. His humiliation rapidly mutated into a blind, violent rage. He let out a feral, inarticulate scream. He lunged across the stage, throwing his body weight forward, aiming directly for the microphone and my throat. He intended to physically tear the podium apart to stop the presentation. He never made it past the center of the platform. Two men detached themselves from the shadows near the edge of the front row. They wore plain dark suits and moved with terrifying calculated speed. They surged up the side stairs of the stage, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. They were not country club security. They were plainclothes county detectives. Stephen emerged from the crowd right behind them, his face a mask of cold, legal authority. He had not just secured the trust and audited the doctor. He had spent the entire afternoon presenting the mountain of irrefutable evidence to his former colleagues at the district attorney's office. The trap was not just a public humiliation. It was a coordinated criminal sting. The lead detective intercepted Justin mid-lunge. He grabbed Justin by his velvet lapel and drove his shoulder hard into Justin's chest violently, redirecting his momentum. Justin hit the polished wooden floorboards of the stage with a heavy, sickening thud. The second detective dropped his weight onto Justin's back, pinning him firmly against the ground. The sharp, metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the silent ballroom. Justin thrashed and screamed, his face pressed against the floorboards, but the detectives held him down with effortless professional force. Amanda sank to her knees at the edge of the stage, covering her ears and weeping uncontrollably. Her pristine white dress was pooled around her on the floor. Her wealthy friends stared at her in shock, completely abandoning her. She was watching her entire fabricated future collapse into absolute ruin. I stood behind the podium, looking down at the man who had tried to erase my existence. I looked at the daughter who had willingly handed him the eraser. I felt no sorrow. I felt no regret. I simply reached forward, disconnected my tablet from the black cable, and closed the leather cover. The audit was officially complete. The heavy thud of Justin hitting the polished wooden stage echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. The two plainclothes detectives did not give him a fraction of a second to recover his breath or formulate a defense. They pinned him firmly against the floorboards, their movements efficient and completely devoid of mercy. The sharp metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like a final gavel strike. Stephen stepped out from the shocked crowd and stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at the ruined tech executive. His voice carried across the room loud and perfectly steady as he formally read the charges. He announced that Justin was under arrest for felony conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of legal documents, and aggravated elder abuse. Justin struggled frantically against the iron grip of the detectives. His expensive velvet jacket tore at the shoulder seam as he twisted his neck to look out at the sea of wealthy guests. He searched the faces of his investors and his affluent relatives, looking for someone to intervene. He found absolutely no one. The men who had been drinking his champagne and listening to his aggressive market projections just an hour ago were now stepping backward, retreating toward the exits. They looked at him with profound disgust. His carefully constructed empire of lies was completely dead. When Justin realized that his opulent facade had crumbled, his survival instinct immediately mutated into pure, unadulterated cowardice. He stopped struggling against the detectives and turned his frantic gaze toward Amanda. She was kneeling on the stage floor, her pristine white dress pooled around her in ruin. Justin pointed his chin at her, his voice shrill and dripping with desperation. He screamed to the detectives that he did not steal anything. He told them Amanda was the mastermind behind the entire operation. He swore to the police that Amanda was the one who broke into the family safe. He claimed she took her dead mother's wedding rings and pawned them herself to cover his margin calls. He begged the officers to believe that he was only trying to protect her and that she had manipulated the entire situation to get her hands on the estate early. Amanda stopped weeping. The shock on her face was absolute and entirely genuine. The man she had conspired with, the man she was willing to destroy her own father for, was eagerly feeding her to the wolves to save his own skin. She slowly stood up, her hands trembling violently at her sides. She screamed at him, demanding to know the truth about the money. She asked him about the brilliant technology startup and the millions of dollars he promised were arriving in their accounts on Saturday morning. Justin let out a harsh, broken laugh right there on the floor. He looked up at her with a face contorted by panic and malice. He told her there was no startup and there was no massive payout coming. He confessed in front of the entire country club that the violent men from the parking garage were going to shatter his legs by noon tomorrow if the illicit offshore account was not settled in full. He called her a naive, arrogant fool for ever believing the illusion he had painted for her. The toxic alliance shattered completely right there on the stage. They tore each other apart in front of their horrified peers, their mutual greed collapsing into a spectacular public implosion. The detectives hauled Justin to his feet and dragged him roughly down the stage steps. He kicked and cursed as they pulled him through the double doors of the ballroom and out into the cold night air. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind him, severing him from my life forever. Amanda was left standing completely alone on the raised platform. She turned slowly toward me. Her flawless makeup was streaked with dark tears and her carefully styled hair was in disarray. The arrogant predator who had confidently placed that fraudulent portfolio on my kitchen island was entirely gone. She fell to her knees and crawled across the wooden floorboards until she was directly in front of the podium. She grabbed the fabric of my trousers, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged me for forgiveness, her voice a pathetic, broken wail. She told me Justin had twisted her mind and manipulated her into doing those terrible things. She swore she still loved me and desperately needed her father to help her fix this nightmare. I did not reach down to help her up. I did not offer a comforting hand or a single ounce of paternal warmth. I looked down at her with a calm so absolute, it felt like ice flowing through my veins. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket. I did not pull out a handkerchief to dry her tears. I pulled out a small, faded velvet jewelry box. It was the exact box that had safely held Linda's wedding rings for 4 quiet years. I let the box slip from my fingers. It hit the wooden stage floor right next to Amanda's knees, falling open to reveal the completely empty silk interior. I looked down at her and spoke, my voice echoing through the silent room. You sold your mother's memory to fund a liar's gambling habit. You wanted me locked in a ward. You are no longer my daughter. Amanda gasped, grabbing the empty velvet box as if it physically burned her skin. She shrank back, but I did not stop speaking. I was an auditor closing out a bankrupt account, and I was going to finish the ledger. I informed her that the corporate shell accounts funding her luxurious lifestyle were permanently closed as of this afternoon. I told her the platinum credit cards in her designer purse were already canceled and would decline if she attempted to buy a single cup of coffee. I spoke with relentless precision, telling her I had personally contacted her landlord and terminated the lease on her downtown luxury apartment. She had exactly $0 to her name and absolutely nowhere to sleep tomorrow night. She had nothing left to steal and nothing left to leverage. Amanda collapsed against the floor, weeping bitterly into the empty velvet box. She realized she had traded her entire future for an illusion that never existed. I did not offer her another word. I stepped around her, leaving her completely alone on the stage. I walked down the stairs and moved straight through the parting crowd of silent, wealthy guests. I walked out of the ballroom and out of the country club, stepping into the cool night air. My audit was finished and the books were finally closed. 3 months slipped away, carrying the stifling summer heat with them and replacing it with the crisp, clean air of late autumn. I sat in my favorite wooden rocking chair on the back porch of my estate, watching the morning frost melt from the surface of the manicured lawn. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere that had choked this house for the past 4 years was completely gone. The walls no longer echoed with Amanda's condescending demands or Justin's arrogant boasts. The silence that surrounded me was no longer a clinical void waiting to be filled with conflict. It was a profound, absolute peace. It was the quiet serenity of a fortress that had withstood a massive siege and emerged entirely victorious. I held a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, letting the warmth seep into my palms. I listened to the wind rustling through the ancient oak trees bordering the property line. The world was finally still. Resting on the small wooden table next to my rocking chair was the faded velvet jewelry box. I reached out and gently opened the lid. Resting securely against the pristine white silk cushion was Linda's bespoke sapphire watch and her flawless diamond wedding rings. I had retrieved them from the financial district pawn shop exactly 2 days after the rehearsal dinner. The broker had been more than happy to release the stolen goods when Stephen walked into his shop, flanked by 2 plainclothes county detectives. Looking at the sparkling stones, I did not feel the crushing, hollow grief that used to consume me. I felt a deep, quiet warmth. I had protected her memory. I had refused to let the physical symbols of our 40-year marriage be liquidated to cover the pathetic debts of a common criminal. The legacy of our life together was safe, completely cleansed of the toxic greed that had briefly infected it. I snapped the velvet box closed and slipped it into the breast pocket of my heavy wool sweater. The morning newspaper sat folded on the table, detailing the ongoing fallout of the Oak Ridge Country Club scandal. Justin was no longer gracing the society pages or pitching non-existent technology startups to wealthy investors. He was currently residing in a secure medical ward at the state penitentiary. The federal prosecutors had moved with terrifying speed, unsealing a massive indictment for wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated elder abuse. But the federal justice system had actually been far too slow to save him from the physical consequences of his own arrogance. Justin never made it to his scheduled bail hearing intact. The offshore loan sharks had caught up with him in a motel parking lot the morning after the rehearsal dinner disaster. They delivered on their brutal promise with absolute, flawless precision. His knees were thoroughly shattered, leaving him facing decades in a federal prison cell from the permanent confinement of a wheelchair. The brilliant visionary was exposed to the entire world as a broken, desperate fraud. And then there was Amanda. She no longer wore pristine white summer dresses or emerald evening gowns. The elite social circles she so desperately craved had severed ties with her the absolute second the scandal broke. Her wealthy friends evaporated into thin air, refusing to return her calls or acknowledge her existence. The reality she had built her entire identity upon proved to be completely hollow. She now lived in a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the decaying industrial outskirts of the city. She worked double shifts as a waitress at a 24-hour roadside diner just to meet her basic survival needs. Her expensive, polished manicures were gone, replaced entirely by blistered feet and aching, exhausted joints. She had reached out exactly one time, leaving a weeping, desperate voicemail, begging me for a second chance and asking for financial help. I did not call her back. I did not offer a single dollar. I simply deleted the message and permanently blocked her number. The excision was total and irreversible. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching a pair of cardinals land on the wooden fence near the garden. I did not sit on my porch, smiling with sadistic joy. I felt absolutely no triumphant, vindictive celebration. Vengeance is a fiery, chaotic emotion, and I felt nothing but the cool, rational calm of a perfectly balanced ledger. I did not destroy my daughter. She systematically destroyed herself. I merely removed the massive financial safety net that had allowed her to live completely detached from reality. I inverted the corrupted power dynamic and forced the natural order to restore itself. Actions now carried actual brutal consequences. Arrogance and greed carried a terrible, heavy price. I was no longer a disposable asset waiting to be drained. I was a man who had successfully defended his home and his honor against the ultimate betrayal. The estate belonged entirely to me again. The irrevocable blind trust was officially dissolved, and my liquid assets were safely repatriated from the offshore accounts. The fortune built on 40 years of relentless, honest labor would eventually go toward funding the charitable endowments Stephen had finalized last month. The money would help families who actually needed it rather than feeding the bottomless delusions of a spoiled predator. I pushed myself up from the wooden rocking chair, stretching my legs in the cool autumn air. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a clear, vibrant morning. The silent reckoning was over. The toxic infection had been surgically removed. I walked back inside my perfectly quiet house, ready to live the rest of my life in absolute, unbroken peace. True love within a family does not mean providing an endless supply of blind financial support or tolerating blatant disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. When we enable destructive behavior, we strip our loved ones of the opportunity to face reality and grow. Setting firm, absolute boundaries is the most profound act of self-preservation a person can undertake. A family built on toxic entitlement and hidden manipulation will always inevitably collapse under the weight of its own greed. Dignity and respect are never automatically guaranteed by blood. They must be actively earned and fiercely protected every single day. If you found value in this story of reclaiming boundaries and protecting your peace, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives.